to Super Scientist. Today we're talking about your boy Galileo Galilei, the father of modern science, as you can see, as he is well known throughout history. We all know him, we all love him, our boy Galileo. As I like to call him, the OG Italian Stallion, another cool fun nickname. And as we'll find out, he did so much stuff, I have another nickname for him. You could probably, maybe you can guess it there at home. But I have here blank Newton and blank Einstein. Well, he is the baby Newton and baby Einstein. This guy Galileo is the baby Newton and baby Einstein because he did so much in the history of science. He's really on the heels of Copernicus and our boy Kepler, who we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And he made many monumental discoveries, which we'll discuss about coming up. So he was born in 1564 in Pisa, Italy, or Pisa actually. And he was a polymath, so he made tons of discoveries. I could have a whole video on him that lasts like an hour long if I really felt like it. The guy was amazing. He did stuff on mechanics, on motion. He discussed inertia, gravity. He was an engineer, mathematician, physicist. He was a polymath through and through. He did a ton of writing, a ton of research. He was brilliant in many different fields. But he did so much, but I decided to really focus it on one thing. What's the one thing? And to keep this momentum going, keep this consistent, we're gonna focus on his astronomy, because he was also in the early days a big boy astronomer. He was always looking up, and he was always super curious. And it turns out his mathematical mind was great for turning that into the stars, as we've discovered with Copernicus and even Ptolemy as well. So his big boy thing that we're going to talk about today is his telescopic observations of Jupiter and its moons. Our boy Galileo here discovered the moons of Jupiter, and they are actually named after him, known as the Galilean moons. 4 Galilean moons, more precisely. So he discovered 4 moons of Jupiter all by his little self. And he used a telescope in the year, his first observations were in 1610. So if you guys want to jot that one down for maybe a test or something. But his first observations of of these moons that would be soon named after him were in 1610. Now it's important to remember that Galileo did not invent the telescope. Some other dude invented the telescope. But he comes on in 1610, starts looking up at the stars. He's always curious. He's like, what's up there? What's going on up here? And his first initial observations, before we get to Jupiter and its moons here, his first astronomical observations, he made a ton of observations as well in the night sky. His first observations were the rings of Saturn. And when he first saw the rings of Saturn, he's like, oh, there's like ears around Saturn or something like that. And then he thought maybe they're just like weird planets or something. It was kind of blurry, so maybe he had bad eyesight. I don't know. Couldn't quite see. He also observed the phases of Venus as well. He's one of the first ones to notice that Venus has phases, adding more evidence to the heliocentric theory. He saw craters on the moon in one of his books, many books that he wrote. He actually has his nice little observations and detailed drawings of the moon, which look fantastic, pretty amazing. He did that as well. And we do know that the ancient Chinese noticed sunspots on the sun, and some other Greek people did as well. Galileo also observed sunspots. Probably not the wisest thing to do at the time, although they didn't know it, but he was looking right at the sun with his telescope. Probably not very good. He did that for a while, probably contributed to his poor eyesight later in life, but hey, what are you gonna do? He's a curious guy, Nowadays we just use a filter on that one, so hey. But at least Galileo's doing it for science, so he's out there being a pioneer for science, as he was wont to do. The big boy discovery, though, as I talked about, is the moons of Jupiter. What did he observe? Well, when he first observed the moons of Jupiter in January of 1610, so he's making a series of observations here, he notices these points of light. And he initially thinks that these points of light, now if you look at, let me jot this down for you guys too. Let me clear the space up. If any of you have had the privilege of looking through a telescope and observing Jupiter for yourself, as beautiful as it is, you'll notice that Jupiter looks like this, something like this, something like that. It's got the little cool lines, like This little cloud bands atmosphere is pretty amazing, pretty cool. We got the big red spots looking at us. It's the eyeball looking at us, judging us from a distance. Okay, so we got our red spot there at Jupiter, and you'll notice, as Galileo did, you know, some little points of light. Now, his initial guess was, oh, those are stars. They're like little stars around Jupiter. And then he noticed the next night. Now, he made a series of observations over many, many months, and I believe years, but he noticed the next night, oh, it's there. And over the series of, I don't know exactly the positions of the moons here, but you can notice he continued to make these observations, and he saw that these points of light were consistently moving, but they were moving in a perfect straight lines, very similar lines, paths. Now, the orbits are a little different. Another thing he noticed was that, let's say this point of light is coming up around, now we know that they are moons of Jupiter. At the time, he didn't know this. This is the first evidence that anyone in history has observed an object in our solar system, something else orbiting from a distance around that object. So what he noticed is, like, let's say this point of light got closer, and then all of a sudden, this point of light would disappear. There it goes. It vanishes. Where did it go? I don't know. Galileo didn't know either. But he guessed, and he surmised, he's like, well, that's weird. And then he sees another point of light, maybe, I don't know how fast the orbits are of Jupiter's moon. It's pretty quick, I think. But maybe a few days later, he sees it over here, sees another point. And then he keeps observing this pattern of behavior, this point of light. And guess what? He sees it go around and around, and he's starting to notice something here. He's like, uh-oh. He's noticing that all these moons, or these points of light, these stars as he called them, guess what? This would be actually a little bit lower. Guess what? They keep popping back over here. Actually, we might actually see a cult Jupiter, but you get the point. Anyway, so he would notice these points of light going around and around the object, the planet Jupiter. Huh. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So he was actually the first human in history, forever and ever, to observe another object orbiting another planet. And he correctly predicted, he didn't predict, but he correctly concluded, there we go. He concluded that this was an object that was actually orbiting Jupiter. These little stars, as he called them, were orbiting Jupiter. So he's the first person to notice that Jupiter itself had moons. He initially only discovered 3 points of light, and then he saw a 4th one. He knows that there's actually 4 in line. So if you guys, on a cool night, a cool crisp night, maybe you might be able to get lucky and spot all 4 dots around Jupiter. You might see all 4. I'm not sure exactly how the distance there, but you'll see the 4 big points of light around Jupiter, which bear his name, the 4 Galilean moons. Epic discovery in the history of science. Amazing job, our boy Galileo. Incredible. This observation was initially not believed because it was so crazy. It's like, are you crazy? People already had to deal with this Copernicus guy back in, remember, 1543. So we had Copernicus here within 1543, his heliocentric model. And now we have our boy Galileo here, some 70 years later or so, going like, I think this Copernicus guy might be right, because these things, they're going around another object, and that ain't us, and they're going around. And so that's the center of these objects. So what's up? And so basically, our boy Galileo here, with this discovery of moons orbiting Jupiter, he is basically face punching Aristotle just centuries, thousands of years later, saying, take that, Aristotle, take that, Ptolemy, you guys don't know what you're talking about. In your face, evidence for heliocentrism. We are not the center of the universe. Other objects can orbit other things. That's crazy. Pretty amazing discovery in the history of science. Incredible. Thank you, Galileo. And one final point, he wrote tons of great works like 2 New Sciences and On Motion and Mechanics, very revolutionary books on mechanics and motion. One final point, this gets him in trouble with the Catholic Church. You know what happens. But he wrote 2 Chief World Systems, which described his advocacy he really wasn't trying to advocate at that point for the heliocentric model. He even like wrote that in this book. He was saying like, hey, here's just the idea for heliocentrism, guys. Don't hurt me, I'm just the messenger. And he also outlined the idea of geocentrism, which Ptolemy talked about. So he outlined the idea of an Earth-centered versus a Sun-centered. And he outlined that here, and he used it more as a dialogue to try to like take a both sides approach without trying to take a stance. But the church didn't like it, and so he got in a little trouble for it, our dear boy Galileo. Nonetheless, his discovery of these 4 Galilean moons, absolutely monumental, amazing, legendary discovery by our boy Galileo Galilei, the OG Italian Stallion, baby Newton, baby Einstein, at it again. Bing, bang, boom, here we go. There it is for our super scientist, Galileo. Thank you all for watching. Hit that sub sandwich button. Go science. Thank you.